So I'm Graham Smith. I'm the lead scientist for all the wildlife research at the Animal and Plant Health Agency. I'm also a trustee of the Mammal Society and a director of Mammal Web at the University of Durham. So I've actually got links to a number of organisations that are all involved in this Searching for Shrews project. So this is Britain's newest mammal, the greater white-toothed shrew. Now, what I'm going to talk about generally is how people can get involved in finding out what's going on and helping us understand the consequences of this introduction. There have also been a couple of other talks on shrews. There's been an excellent talk on the background behind some of this. So if you want to go to the Mammal Society's website and look at the webinar series, the link's up on the screen. So there is a free talk there that does a lot more of the background as well. But if I just go over what we have here in Britain. So we have 3 native shrews across the British Isles. So on the left there you can see the common shrew, which is possibly about the size of your index finger, the pygmy shrew in the middle, which is minute, about the size of your little finger, and then the water shrew on the right, which is black and white bicoloured, so very distinctive and easy to tell apart. If people are having problems seeing the slides, I suggest you come out and rejoin. Actually, it commonly sorts it out. But I will try and describe what's going on here, just in case you can't see them too well. So at the bottom, we've also got maps from an international database called GBIF, which looks at the recording effort across each of these species as well. So you can see the common shrew all across Britain and across a lot of Europe. To East Europe, the recording rate's a little bit low, so don't take that as the distribution, but it's a more northerly European species. The pygmy shrew is the only one that occurs in Ireland, in the centre, and then the water shrew on the right, very similar distribution, but not in Ireland. So what else is there in the British Isles? Well, there are actually 2 other species involved. So we have the lesser white-toothed shrew on the left there, which occurs in the Scilly Isles and Jersey and Sark, and the greater white-toothed shrew on the right, slightly larger species, but about the same size as a common shrew, and that's in Jersey Alderney, and has recently turned up in Ireland and Norway. So we'll come back and look at that in a bit more detail. But the distinguishing features about these shrews, they have a different physiology. They're more warm adapted and can occur in more southerly climes. They have, as it says in the name, completely white teeth. Now, the thing about the British species is they all have an iron deposit on the tips of the teeth. So you can see this reddish brown aspect to the teeth or the skulls or jaw bones if you're looking at them. So what has been happening in Ireland? Well, the greater white-toothed shrew turned up in Ireland, first recorded in 2007. It was there a little bit before that. The only native shrew there is the pygmy shrew, and that has been displaced by the greater white-toothed shrew, and that has been expanding by over 5 kilometres per year. So that's quite a quick expansion rate, as you can imagine. These are only tiny little species, so if they're spreading about 5k per year, they are fairly moving around. Now, there's no evidence yet of an effect in Norway, where it's been cited somewhat more recently, but we have a reasonably good understanding of what's been happening in Ireland. The greater white-toothed shrew is particularly social, so they congregate. They have a slightly lower metabolic rate, and both of those things probably means that explains why they can get to a higher density than the native shrews. So the native shrews, the common and pygmy shrew, Sorex shrews, aren't particularly social. The Crocidura, as these are called, the greater white-toothed shrews, they are quite social and will commonly be found in houses and properties, garages and things like that. So they're also more urbanized, if you like. So why are we concerned about this? Well, I'll just come back to the overall aspect of invasive species. These are a major contributor to biodiversity loss. There are thousands of plant and animal species introduced to Britain, and a reasonable proportion of these are causing harm, which can be quite costly economically, as well as the cost to reduction in species or risk of extinction in some cases. Now, we know the greater white-toothed causes a decline in pygmy shrews in Ireland. Potentially, it may completely eradicate them, we don't know. But there are, in that central area that the white-toothed shrews turned up, there are no pygmy shrews at all. They've completely disappeared. So will it cause the same effect here? We don't know. Now, in Europe, the white-toothed shrews occur along with the other shrews that we have in Britain. So we can't say that it will definitely eradicate or even have an effect on the pygmy shrews. But it is quite possible it may not eradicate pygmies, but it might have an effect on their density. It may reduce their frequency, and that, of course, would be a negative effect on our own fauna here in Britain. So where did this story start? Well, if we go back to the initial findings, Melissa Young posted an image on Facebook, which was later picked up by an ecologist and identified as a greater white-toothed shrew. And this is at Easington Lane. So on the map there, that's the lower black box just east of Durham. Earlier photographs that were posted suggest it may have been present as early as 2015. Now, also last year, we had a DNA analysis from a fecal sample, which was also confirmed as a greater white-toothed shrew slightly further north. So that's the northern box there. So, you know, that's maybe 10 kilometers apart. So we've got two locations where we know we've got greater white-toothed shrew. As a result of these findings, APHA and Natural England have been informed and have got involved. So one thing I want to stress is that mammal reporting is actually very sparse in some areas. So if we look at general mammal reporting in the north of England, it is particularly low, even for common species such as foxes and rabbits. But if we look at the smaller species, so shrews, mice and voles, there's about a dozen of these species, and they are the least recorded mammals in Britain overall. So even more less reported in northern England and other sparse areas. So one of the things we really need to do to understand what's going on, not just with greater white-toothed shrews, but what if there's other introductions of small mammals as well? We really need to increase our reporting rates for all of these small mammals and for shrews in particular. So I'm going to go over the Searching for Shrews project that's been coordinated and set up across a number of organisations, and different ways you can get involved in finding out where they are. So I'd like to start with Mammal Web. So this is a web platform where you can submit and classify camera trap images. So if you have a camera trap, generally they're put up about half a metre up a tree or something like that to record what might be in your garden or local wood. So foxes, badgers, rabbits, commonly recorded. But you can actually adapt these and set them up with a small wooden box as indicated here. So you put your camera trap inside the box and you put on a +2 or +4 lens so you can get a closer focus. Put it out somewhere where you might expect to find small mammals, hedgerows and things like this, and put some grain and possibly some casters in there to persuade animals to come in. It's actually quite successful at getting pictures like this, so you can see the lovely image on the right there. Now, first of all, it's really nice to see these images. Secondly, it can be difficult to tell the species apart. So the nice advantage of submitting through to MammalWeb is lots of other people can look at those and help classify them. So you get a consensus. So if you submit all the photos you've got off these systems, we'll get a consensus view of which species it is. And these data go online, so we can actually check to see what's happening as well. So new records in different locations for other small mammals would also be really appreciated. So this is one approach. The second approach is a smartphone app that the Mammal Society runs called Mammal Mapper. Now, this is particularly useful if you want to record records from what your cat brings in, or owl pellet analysis, or any found dead sightings. Ideally submit it with a couple of photos. If one can be a close-up of the teeth, that really helps because that's the defining feature. You can record ad hoc sightings of animals, which is commonly done for larger animals, foxes and badgers you might see in a roadkill. All of these can be reported. However, it's very hard to be sure you can tell the difference for the small mammals, particularly shrews. So it's very hard for us to verify and confirm which species is which. Nonetheless, all these records really do help understand what's going on across our countryside. Now, there's some novel approaches as well. So the BTO was involved in an acoustic bat survey across the Channel Islands. But it's not just bats that call out at high frequencies. Shrews do as well. So the greater white-toothed shrew was detected along with other small mammals. Now, the BTO has set up the acoustic pipeline for Durham area there, the examples given. So if you have some bat recordings, you could always submit these to confirm what species it is and see if there's any shrews recorded in that as well. So they have a slightly different call from the other shrew species. So all of those species should be identified. So this is a nice new approach, and we would like to know how well it compares with other things as well. Now, the Mammal Society is also about to produce a new photographic guide to examining the contents of owl pellets. So this should be out relatively soon. And they're working closely with the Barn Owl Trust to try and get as many owl pellets collected and looked at as possible across the countryside. Now, one of the nice things about this book, I don't have a copy myself, it's not yet available, but I can show you this example where it does show you the clear differences between the white-toothed shrews on the left there and the other British shrews, and you can see that very clear reddy brown tip to the teeth of the water shrews, common shrews and pygmy shrews. So if you're looking in barn owl pellets at the skull or the jaw, it is really easy to tell them apart. So there'll be a lot of information in there to help as well. Now, the Mammal Society has also produced a series of infographics. So we can see here the examples for the greater white-toothed shrew and the common shrew, and how to tell the difference if you see a full specimen. And to ensure we've got the full range, we've also got the pygmy shrew and water shrew identified. So these can be found on the Mammal Society website. So what has happened since those initial findings? Well, I've been through about 2,000 images of a project called What the Cat Dragged In to try and identify any shrews in there, and there were certainly no greater white-toothed shrews that I could tell. However, in many cases, the item that came in was not in complete condition, let's put it that way. There were somewhat gruesome photos involved in that, so it wasn't particularly pleasant to look at, but I'm fairly confident there's no white-toothed shrews in there. We also went back and looked through all of the photographic records that had been submitted through biodiversity recording previously, so that's either on iRecord or Corio, which are the websites. So we had over 1,000 images that people had previously posted, and one of these was potentially a grey white-toothed shrew in Nottinghamshire. Also this year, the number of shrew records is going up. So we've had over 58 with photographs submitted this year. So I think the searching with shrews is starting to have an effect and people are getting involved in this. Now, Ian Bond was the ecologist who originally identified this greater white-toothed shrew up in Sunderland. He's been looking through a number of owl pellets at about a dozen different locations. And we can see here the ratios, different shrews that have been found so far, and he has found a greater white-toothed shrew in amongst those. Also, the Mammal Society's had emails sent to them directly for people that have suspect sightings. So there's one possible sighting there, which seems reasonably likely. So that's on the searching for shrews more generally. Here at APHA, we've been involved in a much more targeted search around the Sunderland area. So we set trap lines in November. We had to stop this in early December when the weather got too cold, but we've restarted it again. We found a number of common shrews. We found 2 pygmy shrews, which is good news because clearly they're still present and probably around the ratio we might expect. But we have also found 1 greater white-toothed shrew as well. You can see here on the left the Longworth traps that are used, although this particular example was actually run over by a lorry. Fortunately, it had not been tripped, so there was nothing in it at the time, but that is one of the risks of putting out these traps. We're also looking very closely at these new techniques, the camera trap boxes and acoustic surveys, to try and work out exactly where this species currently is. And you can see the picture on the right there of the white-toothed shrew that we did find, and you can see the tips of the teeth there are a lovely white colour, and you can see that rather prominent ear, which is another usually a clear giveaway, but sometimes the common shrew's ears can be quite protruding, so it's not definitive. So what does this tell us so far? Well, if we look at all the latest records, you can see up in the north in Sunderland area, there's the 2 records we previously referred to. Next to that is the recent finding we found, which is in the other direction. So it's about 10 kilometres away in the southerly direction. So it looks like they might have spread out over a reasonably wide area. One of the pluses, a lot of the owl pellets have come from the wider area in the north there, but haven't yet come across white-toothed shrews. So they don't appear to have spread substantially, but certainly sort of 10 or 20 kilometres would not be unlikely. Now, to the south of the map, just east of Mansfield, we can see a couple of red crosses there. One of those was the photographic record that I came across on iRecord, and the other one is actually the owl pellet analysis. So that was 500 meters away from the sighting. So it looks like there may be a small population down there. We'll have to go down and investigate that. But fortunately, those 2 records are extremely close, so we suspect it must be the same population of white-toothed shrews down there. The suspect case is over there in the Forest of Bowland. As I say, this has not been confirmed, but what we might do is try and get some more owl pellets from that area. So any results from over on that side of the country would also be really useful. So if we look at the overall conclusions, we know white-toothed shrew is present in at least 2 locations in England. Now, in both cases, I suspect we haven't found this out particularly quickly, and it may have been present for 5-10 years in both those locations because the reporting rate is so low. We're going to continue putting field staff out and trapping and researching alternative methods for detection. So that's going to be ongoing till we understand what's going on and we understand whether it is actually having any effect on pygmy shrews. So citizen science is vital to all of this, and we've been over a couple of ways in which everybody can get involved in looking for shrews and reporting other small mammals. So we're going to continue with this targeting, trapping and monitoring to confirm the distribution of the areas that they're in. So again, all positive records coming in, even if they don't include greater white-toothed shrews, are really helpful. And this will set a baseline. So understanding things like the relative frequency of common shrews to pygmy shrews in owl pellets, we can see if that changes when we're also starting to get greater white-toothed shrews turning up. So as I said, the white-toothed shrew isn't necessarily, and we think it's unlikely it will completely remove the pygmy shrew, but it is quite possible it will have a substantial effect on pygmy shrew densities. So we would like to understand what effect this is having. Now, already in the few months that this has been going, this has been quite a large project involving lots of organisations. So I'd just like to say thank you so far for the people who discovered it and confirmed it, all of those involved in looking for it, and those involved in the publicity for it. And I will stop there if people have any questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Graham. If anyone does have questions, you can either write them in the chat box or raise your hand. There we go, one from Richard.
Hi, Graham. I've got a question for you. So you suspect that the greater white-tooth may be pushing out the pygmy shrews. Exactly how do you envisage that interaction occurring? Exactly what kind of pressure are they putting on them, do you think?
So it's interesting. Alan McDevitt was looking at this in Ireland and noticed there was a shift in the greater white-toothed shrew's diet. And the shift over time has moved closer and closer to what the pygmy shrews do. So it is probably just dietary competition. And given the fact these occur at much higher densities and are social, it's probably just outcompeting the pygmy shrews for the best food.
Okay, thanks.
There's a couple in the chat. So the first is, do you need a license to trap for shrews?
You need to follow a general license, which is issued by Natural England. I will try and put that in the chat. So there is a link to that in the chat now. You can do it. There are a couple of things to note if you wish to live trap. It is illegal to release greater white-toothed shrews, so they have to be dispatched or kept in captivity in perpetuity. Because they're a non-native species, you can't release them. You also need to know what you're doing. You need to have experience, so you need to get involved with other groups that are doing it if you don't already have that experience. Do we know of any records in Wales? No, Wales is one of the reported areas for mammals. The human density is a bit lower there, particularly in central Wales. So it is an area in which any records would be really appreciated.
And there's a couple of others a bit higher up in the chat. So how do you think greater white-toothed shrew arrived in England?
That's an interesting one, because shrews generally have a high metabolic rate. They're very small. They have to eat a substantial amount of food. So it would be difficult for them to be in a transport container for a couple of days unless there was enough food in there. So insects, casters, things like this to keep them going. So they quite possibly came in with some plant material that contained a lot of soil and therefore had enough insects to keep them alive. Yes, as someone's noticed, they can go into torpor a bit, but given the fact they probably haven't arrived until relatively recently, it's not that easy for them to be transferred around and about. So it's a relatively rare event, but we may have 2, 3, 4 other locations where they turned up. But they're only likely to come in if people are transporting goods that contain sufficient food to keep them going for a few days.
Are there any plans to control them long term?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a simple answer to that. given the fact that population in Sunderland looks as though it might be over sort of 20 kilometres wide, it's unlikely we could ever control it, even if we wanted to, but we don't yet know. Other populations, if they're more localised and we catch them earlier, it may be possible to do something about it. But of course, the main thing here is we want to know if it's having an effect on pygmy shrews. It's far too late in Ireland to do any control because they're now so widely distributed. If we suspect there is something happening affecting our native species, we would like to do something about it, but it may well be too late.
And is there a way that people can contribute to research the Barn Owl Trust is doing, like looking at pellets?
Yes, so you can get involved directly with local nature organisations, with the Barn Owl Trust, or through the Mammal Society. Indeed, the Mammal Society will be running a owl pellet analysis workshop at their annual meeting in August. So again, if people are in the Nottingham-Trent area, they can turn up and do that. I'm sure there are plenty other ways of finding out how to get hold of owl pellets through some local bird groups and looking at them. I'll just stress that any findings we get, please submit them, which is why the Mammal Mapper app is so good. You can put, you put the location from a map as to where you found the pellet, record pictures of what you find, and that would be really helpful. So the more people that can get involved in finding out what's going on with small mammals generally, I mean, we're talking about the greater white-toothed shrew now. It may be too late to do anything about it, but what if another species turns up? There are dozens of other small mammals occur across Europe and across the world that we wouldn't necessarily want here if they might negatively affect our biodiversity.
And I'm not sure if this one's a question or an answer, but does this species go into torpor?
A number of shrew species can go into torpor for a short period, but they certainly don't last very long without food. The native species will consume something like their own body weight every day. This one's got a slightly lower metabolic rate, so it probably consumes about half its body weight or so every day. So it could go into torpor for a short period, but it would not survive long without food and water. None of the shrews do. Their day is only a few hours long. They're active night and day. They're constantly looking for food.
Brilliant, thank you, Graham. Any last? Oh, here we go. When were they first recorded in England in Sunderland?
So the first evidence we have is a photograph that from 2015, also from that same area. But there were earlier sightings, but they were not photographed and stuck on Facebook. So it's quite possible they were around before that. We don't know how long before that. But if it's already been here 7 or 8 years, they could have spread substantially far in that time. So as I say, the more people we can have looking, the greater chance we'll have of finding them early and doing something about it.
Great. Any last questions?
Okay, I'd just like to say thank you for everybody for turning up. And again, if you want to look at the Mammal Society webinar series, you can see some more talks on shrews and some monitoring and various other things as well. So I would encourage you all to get involved in some way or another with improving monitoring. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Graham.